He charged the ranks of the goblins of Mount Gram in the Battle of the Green Fields, and knocked their king Golfimbul's head clean off with a wooden club. It sailed 100 yards through the air and went down a rabbit hole. And in this way, the battle was won. And the game of golf invented at the same moment.
Hello, Callum.
Hello, Josh. Just thinking about that quote there. Could say that he lost his head in the heat of battle.
Yes, you could you could say that. And I was desperately hoping we wouldn't start with golf puns. Golf is not my favorite thing in the world.
Do you think that's why? I've never realized this before, because Golfimbul, right? The Middle Earth strategy battle game, Lord of the Rings Warhammer, and they have a Golfimbul mini, and I always wanted it. It's a really cool mini, and I always loved the idea of this like goblin on a warg and the story of it. And I've just now realized, which is really dumb, that his name literally begins with the word golf.
Yep.
How did I not notice that?
It's a fairly basic, by Tolkien standards, a fairly basic like bit of wordplay that he's put in right at the very beginning of The Hobbit. I love it because I reread The Hobbit like every year, and that's on the first by 2 or 3 pages. And what I enjoy is that it's far more whimsical than basically anything else that happens in the entire of Tolkien's canon. And also, there's never mention of any organized kind of sport or games really again. I don't think at any point. But golf's right there up front.
I've been playing the Hobbit mini campaign that I've been running, which is fun. We should talk about that at some point. But yeah, maybe now realizing that we should play golf in that at some point. And how would we run golf in that? Well, maybe it would be as a mini game.
Strong segue. So we're talking mini games and how to use them in your game, when you might do it, some lessons, times that we've done it, and some examples. We've had a lot of fun playing mini games as our characters and also coming up with some mini games. It's been good collaboratively. So should we kick off with why you would use a mini game or when you would switch into different rules?
Yeah, I think it's good to start with why. Like, role-playing can sometimes, I think, be quite a challenging space to be in, hanging out with your friends. It can be stressful for players when you're putting them in these difficult situations and giving them conundra to work through. And I think also in stories that it's the contrast that sometimes heightens things, isn't it? So if you have an action, I feel that's of the John Wick films, because it's all so high octane. It just has to ramp up, doesn't it, to be exciting? Whereas in some other films where there's like action contrasting, like Tarantino film, although there's not that much action, it kind of is highlighted by the sort of
other kind of like the idea of light and shade.
Yeah. But I guess my point is that in a role-playing game, and in Lord of the Rings in particular, and just talking about you there saying about the whimsicalness and how you really enjoy that, it's a contrast in Tolkien that gives weight to the gravitas to the important moments. So for me, I think the why of a mini game is to bring some more light-hearted, jovial opportunities to your players to role play in, particularly in a campaign where your characters are together for a while, because it can be quite a nice way to bond as well.
Yes, it's very real world in that sense. I think it's very in keeping with Tolkien as well, because although the books themselves don't have that much whimsy in them, the world and Tolkien does value kind of merriment and cheer and friendship very highly. That's talked about a lot, about singing songs. The elves love poetry and music and playing pranks on each other. So that idea of a bit more light-hearted fun in a world that's quite shadowy is very in keeping with Tolkien's vibe. So I think actually introducing some fun mini games to play during quite a heavy campaign fits perfectly with the world. And we've done that a couple of times. You've done well to often at times, I think we as players maybe needed a bit of the light following some aid. You've done well to slide some right in there. So maybe we could talk through some examples so people can get a sense of what we mean.
Yeah. So I can guess start with when we've used it. So I think there's been 3 sessions where we've done mini games. We've had quite a few like kind of other sessions which have been more like not really so much in character, but not like running the game, more like a fellowship event, like a Torpor, which is a sort of Christmas or Yuletide events, and we can talk about that later. But the games, the 3 times done it is the first time was when you were with the Woodman, the Field of Heroes, which is a place in the books, which is near Roscoeville. And that was the first time I ran it. And essentially, it's very simple. So it was almost like a skill challenge, but basically, you had to compete in a series of events. There was athletics, tossing a tree. It was a DC 15 athletics check. Then you had to hit a lump of charcoal thrown in the air with a javelin. That's a DC 15 acrobatics. And then you had to light a fire with no aids, a DC 15 survival. If you passed all of those, then you got into a combat, which is basically I ran a combat, but it was unarmed strikes, and you had to wrestle the other person to the ground. And then at the end, there was a prize. So that was like really simple session, started us off, and I think everybody really enjoyed that. And then we did 2 more ones. The next one was something called the Dragon Tide Festival at Lake Town, and that's specifically mentioned in the AIM books. And you were there for that. And I thought, let's do some mini games. And then the third time was at Town Stonyford, which is your guys' adoptive town that became your base that you sort of built up over time. And we did the Stonyford games, and we'll talk about that finally because I think that's where we really nailed how to do mini games well.
I agree. I think you learned a lot from the first kind of 2. I think on the Field of Heroes one, I think what it felt like, it was great fun. What I enjoyed was, I mean, mechanically, it was basically combat mechanics and ability mechanics, but without any real threat or jeopardy, really. That's what you're looking at doing. Non-lethal combat, which you go into knowing that this is just sparring or wrestling, and the other things are all an opportunity to shoot your bow or throw a javelin or show your strength. So you're getting to do the kind of fun rolling of dice using the abilities that you do in combat, but without any of the pressure or stress. Or, I mean, often those things are good fun and why we do it, but a chance to do those things in a very like safe, sandboxy way, which is fun, I think, because you get to do the things that you're good at without any risk of failing.
That's where we started out. And then I think at the Dragon Tide Festival, I had this idea that there's be this festival going on. It'd be a good way for you guys to get to know the town a little bit, because it started the campaign at Lake Town, but never really established why you were there because we didn't know what we were doing. Just slightly odd looking back on it now. And you came into Lake Town and was like trying to show you the area and have a reason why you might get to talk to the important people in the town. So it's, we'll do this festival. And then it got me to have all the NPCs in, and then you became famous. And what I remember thinking at the time was, how do I make this fit in the world? And that's, I guess, one piece of advice I'd give for mini games in Lord of the Rings world would be, in Middle Earth, would be like try and think about if there's a festival or mini games happening in an area, make it something that makes sense to that people in that culture. So I think from memory in the Lake Town Dragontide Festival, one of them was like a swimming challenge.
Yes.
One of them was like rowing race.
Mm-hmm.
And there was another one where you had to wrestle each other off a boat. So you're like standing on either end of the boat and you had to knock the other person off. I think there's a name for that in real life. And then finally there was like an archery competition where there was like a series of balloons released and you had to shoot one down to get the prize.
I remember that bit vividly because I really enjoyed the Dragontide Festival because I've been playing Halmir for, I think, a couple of sessions, maybe half a dozen sessions. And I've got my head around the mechanics, and I've got my head around him as a character, and having switched from Theodric, a very different personality. We arrived at Lake Town for the festival, and it felt like an opportunity because he'd been a soldier who was quite experienced at sort of physical athletic abilities. It was a chance for Halmir, Captain of Gondor, to show his quality. And he did particularly well in it because he was a kind of natural swimmer. And he, at the very end, the final kind of flourish was this huge kite version of Smaug went up. And the people who were competing as archers would shoot down this kite. And Halmir, I was really like into it, and he climbed up onto the roof of the Great Hall and fired an arrow channeling Bard and brought it down. And it was it was a really exciting moment in game because it, like with Field of Heroes, it was pretty risk free beyond kind of embarrassment of failing. But your description of this dragon, albeit just a kite over the town, had all the hallmarks of the disaster before. Halmer had this big achievement, and it helped define his characters with the party. So even though it was a bit of a lighter session in a way, it still used all the same mechanics and all the same role play as if we had been fighting big monster, if we'd been fighting Smaug over Lake Town for real. And it still had a kind of meaningful character development opportunity as well, which I thought was fun in a weird way. Feels layered in an Inception way here. Normally role-playing games are a way to safely explore exciting, dramatic things that would happen in the real world, and then the mini games in the role-play games are effectively that, a safe way of exploring fictional danger.
Yeah, do we need that? I think we need that sometimes, don't we?
I 100% think we do. Does it go deeper? Can you go to the next level of? Can you safely explore mini games?
Characters. You do a game where you're playing as people that are playing characters, playing a mini game in a role-playing game.
Yes.
Don't do that. Yeah, I've just found the rules actually for specifically what it was, which is basically what I said before. But I'm now remembering why I did those events. So in my head, I was like, why would they celebrate the Dragon Tide? It's a sort of memory, a collective recollection of what happened with the dragon attacking. Like every 5 years after the dragon attacked Lake Town, they have this festival. And so I thought, they start with flee the town, because everybody had to flee because it was on fire. So that's a swimming contest. And basically for that, you just had to do, I think, a series of athletic checks or something. You don't want to, a good tip I'd say for mini games is you want to make sure that everybody can compete. You don't want to set up a game that is a swimming check. You've got the fastest speed, so you win that check. Like, what was the point? At the end of the day, you're going to accept that the barbarian is likely, the slayer is likely to be the best at a swimming contest, or someone who's got swimming proficiency. But ultimately, you have to make sure that there's still a chance that other people can compete.
I think as well, it's a space in the game that you, as the lore master, can be a little bit more flexible. I think games are, and we've spoken about this before, it is important that they have rules and structures and expectations, and that you can't just let players do whatever they want, because it slightly blurs the boundaries of how the game works. I think in a mini game where it's pretty consequence free, if one of your characters who's not an athletic character, but maybe is a scholar, pitches you an idea of, I want to roll an intelligence check of some kind to almost puzzle out the swimming, I think in a combat, I would need heavily convinced that they could get any value of that. I think in a mini game, I'd be much more relaxed about, if you want to be creative, the consequences are minimal anyway. We can have some fun and role play sense. I think it is a good sort of safe space for that.
That's definitely true. And we'll come on to another way you can use your characters if it's, you're just trying to avoid it all being physical, which I think didn't get quite right at the Dragon Tide Festival. It was quite focused towards martials. Yeah. But when we did the Stonyford Games, definitely learned from that. So you had to flee the city. I think you won that, Halmir. And then the second one was save our goods. So the idea was that you were rowing a boat and you had to save goods from the town. So that was a kind of quite a physical challenge, but you also needed sort of like navigation. And both of these basically, they're like skill checks. That's what you're using as skill challenges.
Yeah.
And we talked about them before. And then the next one was hold the balance. So it was a boat wrestle, 2 people. And then finally it was kill the dragon, which is archery. So it was like based around the event that happened. So I guess if you were going to do a different festival somewhere else, you'd have to make sure it's a sort of festival that would fit that people's culture and that they would in the first place have a festival. So I think that's probably all I have to say about the Dragon Tide, because I want to spend the bulk of the time talking about Stonyford Games and how that worked really well. So anything else you want to say about Dragon Tide games or any of those mini games?
I think on the idea of having them thematically, I think what that really helped for me as a player and listening to you as the lore master was it made it easier for you to describe it narratively and what was going on, because actually you describing kind of abstract games is not necessarily the most thrilling a session, but because the games are all linked to this event that happened in the past, which were very dramatic, you were able to say, now the competitors are, so the water is writhing as the competitors are at the swimming contest, like when the dragon. That felt nice to have the kind of echo of what had happened before. And I think you could do that in very different ways depending on the setting, but tying all the events together like that lets you, I think, have a lot of flavor, so color that you can bring to it.
I think it also allowed me to show you Lake Town in a way that
Yes.
wasn't so forced, because it was like, oh, you're going for these games. Oh, the games are in this bit. Oh, there's that thing there. Oh, there's a strange thing
Yeah.
happening in the under. You see someone flittering around in this underneath the support structure of Lake Town. Oh, you've heard a rumor about this monster called the Gutter Maw, which is being told to be abducting someone, and everyone's like kind of a bit on edge when they're doing the swimming stuff. Like, is Callum going to just ambush us with a giant creature in the game? It's not completely relaxed, but yeah, I think that having that theme and then using you can use it for an introduce. So you did this really well. Obviously, it's a pre-written module. You're not giving you all the credit, but I think it works really well. Or maybe you changed it in Call of the Netherdeep, where there's the festival right at the beginning, because we were a new party. We didn't really know our characters. We didn't really know the mechanics of our characters, and we didn't really know the other party members. And that campaign starts with a series of like games and a festival, but mini games, which are pre-written. It was so much fun.
Yeah.
Really loved it.
And they were, and I think minigames and festival, like I think particularly in a sort of a high fantasy D&D kind of classic idea, the idea of going to a town and there being a festival is quite a kind of common idea, and it's a good way into things because there's lots to do. There are immediately loads of quite light story hooks and games for people to engage in. And I think what the writers of Call of the Netherdeep did well was, you know what, people enjoy that. Let's just front load the whole campaign. Like, it's literally the first thing you do. You'll have new characters, and it is a great way, sandbox, for you to have these new characters you've never played, to test out a lot of the mechanics and to see what the rest of your party can do where there's no real risk. I certainly found DMing it for you in Call of the Netherdeep, I really got a sense of the party dynamic as a result of the games. Before you'd ever engaged in a combat of any kind, I really got a sense of the personalities and how you were all linked together. And I think there are a lot of character development can come out of mini games.
We got loads of stuff. Like, Stuart's character was meant to be this anonymous person. He kept winning and we kept shouting his name. That's going to live on for a long time. And yeah, I think it's a slightly different thing than combat, isn't it? Where like somebody might die and it's quite hard to like feel joyful for that. This is a slight segue that I just remembered another mini game that's actually in the Adventures in Middle Earth book. So I feel silly if we didn't mention it. Smoke rings.
Yeah, of course. I didn't even think of it as a mini game because I think you integrate it really well into just the campaign itself. But yeah,
There was a recurring thing that happened when there was like downtime on the journey. People were at a campfire, and then often Stuart, let's be honest, but many people would say, "Oh, I've taken out my pipe." Stuart, even Runan, his character Runan, even made his own pipe and engraved it, and there was like a special pipe he found along the way that gave you bonuses, so it incorporated into the campaign. But essentially, the rules and adventures of Middle Earth, I don't remember which page it's in, it is called the game of Smoke Rings, and it gives you a series of different things that players can attempt and the DC. So I actually gave you the list and then didn't tell you the DCs, although you figured it over time. Going all the way from a series of tiny rings, small but perfectly small, formed spinning ring, medium-sized ring, through which flies a small ring, the grower, the shrinker, the giant ring, and the dragon. And I guess it's so thematic because we see it and it's described in the books. And essentially you make 3 attempts by rolling a d20 and adding either your wisdom or dex score. If you're proficient with a pipe, add your proficiency bonus. So it's a cool reason to be proficient with a pipe.
Yep.
And then you get points from lowest to the highest. So you basically attempting them. And the DCs range from 12, which is the lowest, up to 17 for dragon. And actually, Stuart decided he wanted to do a smoke raven. And I don't think he only achieved it once, really near the end of the campaign. He tried it so many times, and he got it really near. It was a really cool moment as well.
It was cool because it was something that we did regularly, but we'd done it many times. Often it was a thing to do because maybe there'd been difficult moments in the party at night around the campfire or in a hall somewhere. We'd sit down and do smoke rings, and it was this thing that they did together. It was nice that we returned to it again, And like you say, we got an understanding of the DCs over time, and we got a sense of what was difficult. And maybe midway through the campaign, we'd done it a few times when someone tried a dragon and it was successful. It felt in character and as a player like it was an exciting and impressive thing. And actually, the rules are pretty simple, really. It's got a nice bit of flavor. It's grounded in the world, and you let and encouraged us to play the game.
When you build a character in D&D, this is again a bit of a sidebar. Quite often you get like playing cards, a chess set, which feels like meaningless flavor. Yeah, so you often have these game sets, but I've never once thought to use it in a game. Whereas for some reason, smoke rings feels like, oh yeah, I want to do that. I don't quite know why that is. It just ties into the theme better.
Yeah, I think the thematic, having it tied into the world makes a huge difference.
Yeah,
Gives you a huge motivation to do it, I think.
just as like Witcher and Gwent. And
I was thinking about that when we were talking at this episode. I was thinking of examples of where minigames, because in some video games, minigames really annoy me and I don't like them. And I think Gwent is the complete other end of the scale in that it's so well done. If people haven't yet played The Witcher 3, I would personally strongly advise you do. I think it's wonderful. But Gwent as a minigame is unbelievable. Like, it is effectively a standalone collectible trading card game that if only Gwent was available, I would just play it.
it is available. You can buy it.
What, physically or as a
I
video
think
game?
so, yeah.
It's so good. I loved it. Anyway, we're coming.
I got so into that whenever I played Witcher, I just ended up playing Gwent, and then I never
So did I.
actually finished the campaign, if I'm honest. So
Yeah, I
let's go
went
back
through.
to it.
I didn't get into it for ages, and I was enjoying all the quests and defeating monsters and the story. And then I think as part of a quest, I got a number of the cards. The mechanics for collecting the cards was very good. And then I just decided I completely went off on a tangent. It was like I will just prioritize like missions and places where I could get more cards to make my deck better. And I think the main campaign was like effectively on pause for so long while I was just running around collecting trading cards.
There you go. Gwent's you could make your own card trading game for your role-playing game if you have infinite time and energy.
Why don't we talk about the Stonyford games? Talk
Yeah.
about inventing games and writing games.
So the Stonyford game, I'm trying to think about when that was in our campaign. I think it was after a major arc.
Yeah, we'd returned to the Vale. So we spent a long period of time out east, and then we'd migrated back to the Anduin Vale, probably about 2/3 of the way through the campaign. A lot had happened. We found ourselves at Stonyford. Again, I think we'd had some really challenging times. We were at Stonyford to kind of rest, recuperate. I think we'd taken a fellowship phase, an extended fellowship phase there. I can't remember whose idea it was, but it was reasonably collaborative that we were going to celebrate, I think, with a feast and the Stonyford games.
Yeah, we often did that lower stake games, particularly when there was like a fellowship phase and you were all together. Because the rules as written are like fellowship phase is quite a mechanical thing, but we were always a very role play heavy group. So what I did differently this time was I decentralized it and I said to each of you, what would your character in the game create as a minigame? And honestly, I think I'd forgotten how good it had been because everyone went off and made these really thematic and fun mini games. So we'll just go through them all, and I think that will hopefully give you guys some ideas about how to do it. And I would really recommend getting your players to go off and do it because as a lore master, it made it so easy. Because I basically that session just sat down and was like, right, and each player. So if you created a game, you didn't compete in it, but everybody competed in everybody else's games. So it also meant that like people weren't creating games that they were really well suited to because they didn't have any stake in it, did they? So I'll just walk us through them and tell you who the character was and what the game was, and then tell you the rules, and then Josh, you can give a commentary on it or how you remember it feeling.
Yes.
So the first one was called Wildflowers of Wilderland. And this was created by Theodric, who was Josh's first character. And I think, did you create this, Josh, or did I write it on Theodric's behalf? I can't quite remember.
I think we talked about it together.
Yeah.
I think you came up with it, and Helmy did take part.
So essentially what happened was Theodric was trying to tell people about nature, and he was really into wildflowers. So he took wildflowers and hid them in boxes, and people had to identify them. So essentially, each character gets a chance to smell the flower inside the box before making a skill check of their choice in a bid to find it in the meadow.
Yeah.
A player may ask Theodric one question about the flower and roll with advantage. However, as this takes longer, if their roll is less than the 15, they are out as they have taken too long. So essentially a race to find the flower. The character the lowest roll is out, and the players may then smell the next box. So essentially you're eliminating people each round. You can try and ask a question, but you have to do it well, otherwise you're out. And you can't use the same check twice. And essentially the person who identifies or finds the most flowers correctly wins. So it was really open, but like I remember. What do you remember about that game?
I remember it being really good because it was, I mean, firstly, it was very low stakes. I liked that what it did, and you narrated it well, was you talked about the flowers, and I think you had notes of the different flowers that would be found in the wildflower meadow, which again felt very like grounding and pastoral for Stonyford. So it was a good way again of emphasizing Theodric's character and the character of the setting. And I think because it was skill agnostic, it wasn't like, oh, you have to use nature, and therefore a character who's not good at nature is why am I even taking part? It gives the flexibility of someone saying, actually, I'm going to use my perception because I've got a good nose. I'm going to investigate. I'm going to try and use a bit of intelligence to identify it. Maybe it is about using nature. Maybe it's about using something a little bit more quirky than that.
Animal handling, get the birds to find it.
I think there are so many options that you can use. You could even use, if the flower has some kind of connection to a particular culture, you could potentially use like lore or traditions and think, oh, I don't know exactly what the flower is, but I do know that the woodmen will often hang this around their door. And therefore I think, oh, I know. So I think it allowed space for the characters to be quite creative. And it was fun for everyone. And it felt very much, oh, this is Stonyford. The beehives are here. There are flowers. It's about the good things in the world.
I thought it was a great start. So the next one we got is called Dragonbone, which was made by Torvald, James's character. And he put a lot of work into this. I think
this was amazing. I remember it. It was amazing.
It was so good. I think mechanically this was the best one because it was like just really satisfying. So the little blurb he wrote for it was, most of the good folk of Lake Town know not to approach the gilded carcass of the dread worm Smaug. But among those who dwell on the lake are a rare breed of brave, many might say foolhardy divers who plunge into the waters of the long lake to see if they can make their fortune out of the drake's ruin by retrieving the gold and jewels that adorn the dragon's bones. You are each one member of a band of such divers, linked by the camaraderie of your perilous profession, but also stand as rivals and potentially enemies. Will you find riches in the dark waters? Will you delve too greedily and too deep? And will you ever discover the hidden secret behind the name Lake Town? I was reading that. So the rules are, first, roll a d4 to dive. The difficulty of the first dive is 0. The dive roll determines how many chances you have. It also determines the order of turns, descending from the highest roll to the lowest. Players that have an equal dive score roll their chance d6 at the same time. So basically, roll a d4. Say you get 4, that means you've got 4 chances to dive, essentially. Just how well you're going to dive down. The next stage is take your turn taking your chances. So each person in order rolls a d6, and that determines how many riches they find on each hoard. Until everyone, and you keep rolling until everyone's run out of chances. But you can use your chance, instead of diving, you can use it to steal from a target player's riches, adding them to your own hoard.
Yeah.
And you must announce before you roll how you're going to roll. And you can't steal from more than one player's current hold, regardless of your roll. And then if you both have rolled the same in your dive roll, a d4 at the beginning, and you both choose to steal from each other, you roll a d20, and whoever rolls the highest d20 takes all the riches from the other person.
It was great. And I think, if my recollection is to begin with, we were all diving, which I think is the way that James and Torvald intended the game. We started to accumulate. But once we'd started to accumulate different hordes, and people had been doing it at different rates. Very quickly, it was like, oh, it's probably going to be easier if I just steal. And then it was complete chaos.
It was like it's like kind of confusing to understand the rules or the way I've described it, but it was actually really quite straightforward once you got your head around it. And it played an actual board game. I was like, this is way more complicated than anything I would have come up with.
It was really good,
really thematic as well.
Yeah.
Real joy to play. So that was Dragon Bone, which was really, really good. So thanks, James, for that one. The next one was a much more straightforward game, which was by Carhu, so Scott's character, the Slayer, and I think that was very in character. And the game was Tree Flipping, a Grim game, and I just love this as well because he actually, although I'm saying it's simple, before we'd done it and I just made it an athletics check, he kind of really thought it through a lot more. Essentially, what you had to do is roll a d20 and add your strength or athletics if you're proficient. If you got a 0 to 4, you fail to flip the log. A 5 to 10, you roll a d10. On a d10, on a 10 is perfect. 8 or 9 is acceptable. And then if you rolled a 11 to 15 on your strength athletics, you roll a d8. If you roll 8 on the d8, it's perfect. If it's a 6 to 7, it's acceptable. If you roll a 16 to 20 on the strength athletics, you roll a d6. On a 6, it's perfect, and 4 and 5 is acceptable. And if you roll 20 plus, if you roll a d4 on a 4, perfect, 2 out of 3 successful. So what I thought was good about this was because when you're doing caber tossing, not that I really know anything about it, I just watched it at Highland Games sometimes. It's not just about like throwing it really hard. Like you can have to throw it high enough so it lands, but then it also has to toss over and land.
Have you ever done it before?
God, no, I don't think I could do it.
I have done it once.
Oh, you've done it? Oh.
Or not like in a competitive way or anything like that. I was at a thing and there was like a demonstration of it. And a lot of it is obviously you have to be strong. But the dexterity side of it, to use an ability, of flipping it accurately in a straight line, it blew my mind, like how difficult that bit of it was. So I think you're right with Scott's game, having a game that reflected it wasn't just a raw number of like literally the strongest person can flip this thing over. It is more technical than that.
And there's a degree of chance in there. Everybody can compete in it. So you might roll very low, but it reflects how it is actually mechanically in real life. So I thought it was quite an elegant way of writing the rules. And you got 3 tosses each. So that was like a really cool. And I think did he do it as a demonstration and it was just amazing? I can't remember. He probably did do something like that. The next one was Splash, and that was Halmir's stone fighting game.
Yes, so I saw it as an opportunity. Whenever we did things like this, there were quite a few times in the campaign that you invited us as players to contribute in some way, to like write a song or a poem or tell a story or create a minigame. And for me, I always thought of that as an opportunity to think of Halmir's like past and character and his backstory. Okay, so if he's going to be showing a game that he's played to the other members of the party, I thought, well, why would he have learned a game? Is it a game he's good at? Is it a game from his childhood? Where's it come from? All this kind of thing. He grew up around water, and he favored being in the military and being around. I thought of it as quite a kind of a game of kind of camaraderie, fun, a bit of jeopardy. And it was at Stony Ford in the water, they would be on stepping stones and they would have to wrestle and fight each other and try and tip themselves into the water, which I thought as a combination of what we'd done at Dragontide, but also the TV program Gladiators was what I was envisaging.
Yeah. So for that one, it's like mechanics of combat. Players would roll initiative, and then the first player makes a simple weapon attack using strength, and then the second player makes a dex saving throw, and the DC is the attack roll that was just rolled. And then you can choose to roll the saving throw at disadvantage, and if you pass at disadvantage, you can immediately make an attack back. Like you get basically a free attack. And I think it was just until someone failed the dex saving throw, wasn't it? Yeah. So it was quite simple in some ways, but effective. And
it was also, I think, it was quite rules light, but I think it allowed for a good bit of narrative in that a lot of people fell in and got wet, and it was quite funny. And it didn't need to be much more.
No, it didn't need to be much. It didn't need to be much. And like, I think that was what's really nice is there's a real variation of games. Like I think if I was a DM, I tend towards a certain type of game, and you another, and James another, and everybody's DM now. So we all have our style. So then we were like getting all these different DM styles in a way,
Yeah, it was
and
fun.
prep styles. So the next one was Runan's Runic Challenge, which was made by, you guessed it, Runan, Stuart's character. So I thought this was fun. I thought it was going to be like, when he first told me about it, some like puzzle, riddles or something, but it was actually, you have to hit runes on a wall with an axe.
Well, like axe throwing at a bar.
So yeah, you get 1 point for outer, 3 points for middle, 5 for inner, and 10 for center, and the DCs going up are 12, 16, 20, and 25.
Yeah, it was also good fun, and again a bit of character, because I think we're the ones that tended towards martial games. Really allowed for that character. Of some of the characters were much more martial by nature. Halmir and Karhu in particular were like the soldier and the slayer. But it meant I certainly felt as Halmir that there was that pressure to do well in a game like that, and that perhaps for other characters there was less pressure. So it was a chance for them to get one over on a companion they've been with for a very long time. And it was a nice reflection again, I think, for Stuart, for Runin, for the dwarves, of a game that felt very rooted in like dwarvish culture and the idea of the axes and the runes. So again, it was just nice to feel we were delving into the backstory even just a little bit.
Yeah. The next one was by Isambard, so Bert's first character, the scary hobbit, and his was called Vomit Game.
I think that
Nifredel.
tells you everything you need to know.
Everybody had to ingest a tincture of Nifredel, a herb which induces emesis, so it makes you vomit. And I think you had to roll a Constitution saving throw at disadvantage, something like that. If anybody rolled less than a 10, they immediately vomited and they're out of the game. And then after that, everyone had to make a performance check. And the combined total of the Constitution saving throw and the performance check won. Because essentially it was not just could you handle it, but also even if you couldn't handle it, if you could put on a really good performance that you couldn't handle it, then you might win. Because it's who tolerated it the best. I just thought it was such a silly little game.
So silly, and it's so like balanced out, much like the mini games themselves give a bit of light and shade to the campaign. I thought a game like that really helped a bit of light and shade compared to something like Dragonbone, which is quite a sort of thoughtful, cerebral game. And then it was like, well, we'll then pivot to who will not vomit.
That is so funny. The next one was called Tears of an Onion by Ansevald, and Ansevald was Brendan's temporary character he had when Malbeth was in the Madness episode, or was he? No, he's captured by Nazgul. That was it. And I can't remember actually if Brendan was playing this or did I make this on Ansevald's behalf, because I wanted to get involved in the fun. So the idea was that you had a cut onion and it was held up to your eyes, and you then had to chop the onion. So it was like a combination of like you have the onion in your eyes, but you're also having to chop the onion. So essentially, first you had to roll a Constitution saving throw of a DC 12. If you failed that, you got disadvantaged on the next step, which is chopping the onion. And you could either do dexterity plus intelligence checks or dexterity plus wisdom checks in order to chop an onion. It was experience, or you read it in the cooking book, and then combined total of those two checks would win. So again, Ansevald was all about cooking, preparing food. And I think I tied it in, which was like Ansevald was like a no-nonsense guy in some ways. So he was just trying to prepare the food for the feast was what he was trying to do. So he was just getting people to help with that. And that was his challenge, was just like, I don't really want to engage with this, but I could do some help with the meal prep. So yeah.
And between them all, that was a whole session. So that was several hours doing all of those things, weaving the narrative in. I can't really remember who won, which is probably telling of the fact that I vividly remember the games. I don't remember who won. And I think that probably sums up where the fun was. It was the taking part that was fun.
I have one last game that I found. I can't remember this one very well. Maybe you can. It's called Only Fools a Horse by Dior. So Bert's other character.
I do remember.
I think this was done at the end of the session, after you'd all had the feast and there'd been some meat or something. And it's horses can be very wise, it is said. The aim of the game is to fool the horse into choosing the carrot from the wrong hand. One player is the horse and is blindfolded on a horse. Each non-horse player makes an animal handling check. On less than a 10, disadvantage on their next check. If they roll 10 to 15 on animal handling, they get a standard roll on the next check, and if they roll 16 or above, they get advantage the next check. And then each non-horse player makes a riddle check with the either disadvantage, standard, or advantage from before. The horse player then has their blindfold removed and has to make an insight check against the riddle checks of each player. If they beat the riddle check, they get the carrot and gain 1 carrot point. If the riddle check is higher than a non-horse player, that player gets a 1 carrot point. My brain hurts from just explaining that.
It was so bonkers, and it did come at the end of the session after some fictional booze was imbibed, possibly some real booze was imbibed, and it was very Bert, and it was very Dior, and it was great fun.
Yeah. I think it was a great session, and for me, I think that these little small mini games give you a chance to mess around with some rules. You can test out some things that you might be using in other circumstances, and it gave the players a chance to kind of role play in a semi-structured manner. So rather than just having a session where like, you guys are at camp, now you're going to just sit down and role play with each other.
Yes.
In a non-combat way. Oh, why do the characters not get on? Because you have to kind of create a framework or a structure for which them to create shared experiences and memory and have a reason to talk about things. And I actually think there was some probably quite serious role play that came out in amongst the games as well, like in between people doing these really silly things.
And I think that I think in all cases used the minigame sessions normally between periods of quite like intense RPGing, where we'd maybe been in some quite tough combat, some quite emotionally intense role play, and then we would have these sort of periods of downtime. And I think it was a good opportunity for us to bond as players, our characters. And I think in a lot of the sessions there was then private one-on-one conversations reflecting on things that had happened that maybe we didn't do as much when we were on a journey and we were in the moment, we were involved in the hunt or the mission or whatever. But it was that afterwards, once you'd taken that kind of sigh of relief, that you were able to turn to the other character while someone was trying to trick someone with a carrot, and you could perhaps reflect on what was going on.
The mechanics of that was so confusing, but I think it lent itself to a puzzling challenge, isn't it? Yeah, I think the other good thing about it is it doesn't really need that much prep. If you ask the players to prep all the mini games, you're like, and then they're all really immediately engaged because they want to share their little thing with the other players. So yeah, I think I would really recommend giving it a go in your game where it fits. Maybe just start with one. Just use smoke rings if they like that, and sure, I'm sure there's some groups that just will be like, I don't want to do this. I want to just go and do, I'm sure it won't fit every gaming group, but who knows? Maybe your players will love it and they'll want more mini games.
Something it reminded me of is we've talked on the pod a lot about Matt Colville, his DMing advice, which is typically for 5th edition, but I learned a lot watching his how to run the game videos. There's one that he did that always stuck with me, and I've used the advice a lot. And the video is just called Orcs Attack. And he talked in it about how, as a DM, to handle situations where players are maybe a bit stuck, maybe literally, that they are stuck in a place, or they're not sure where to go next, or maybe the role players hit a bit of a wall. And his solution to that was literally Orcs Attack. And he would just have a combat with some orcs that he would just quickly insert into the narrative on the basis that the change of pace into some kind of combat, it sometimes unstuck the players and was just fun. It was just a fun thing. I actually think mini games can be used in exactly the same way, a very low stakes way. But if you are going to a new location, or maybe the characters are a bit stuck, sometimes you're involved in a quest and you feel you're going around in circles. You may be doing some investigating, you're not getting somewhere, or you're not quite sure how to piece the puzzle together. I think as a lore master or dungeon master, just throw in some mini games for whatever reason. They come across the festival, or they go into a tavern and someone's playing a game, or someone on the road maybe challenges them to a bit of sport. It lets them shift gear a bit. It lets them have a bit of inconsequential fun. And sometimes that can get things back on track. There's a bit in it's campaign 2 of Critical Role, so I don't think spoilers count now, several years ago, but broad strokes, there was a section of the campaign where they had got, I think, quite bogged down, and the mood among the players, the actual party, was really quite low. They'd had a series of kind of defeats in battle, and as a viewer, it was fun, it was dramatic. But I think as players, it was weighing on them. And Matt threw in what became known as the Happy Fun Ball, which was this kind of unusual magical dungeon that they ended up going into. Now, it actually had quite a lot of in-game consequences, but it was the same thing. It was, let's just shift pace dramatically with something that's a different kind of fun. And I think there as well, that kind of almost unstuck the players. They were able to be like, oh, here's a different thing I can enjoy and get restarted with.
I think that's a great example. Happy Fun, but it just made me think they've obviously released Called in Netherdeep. Can you go into the Happy Fun Ball?
I mean, I'm currently dungeon mastering.
I remember watching that. This is just like such a cool dungeon, and it felt like someone was just so rich with things to do. Oh, that'd be cool. We whole think about that. So, yeah, I think we've covered their mini games. We've given you our thoughts on why and when, where, who, and what of mini games, and some examples of mini games that we've used in our games and that we as a group have come up with. So do write in if you use mini games, or if you've got one that you want to suggest us to use, and maybe if you use smoke rings, that would be cool to hear about. And I hope this is useful for your game.